today we are joined by an expert who is known as the warehouse whisperer. The warehouse whisperer. So I want to hear all about that. Where did that start from? Where did that come from? And why that?
The true connection between myself and a warehouse is that it all stems from organization and structure.
We always used to think, right, the younger generation, that warehouse is that ugly part of work that you don't really want to get into. It's the boring aspect of it. What is, the key signs that you should look for in terms of seeing, these are the areas of problems? Is that something that you do, or is it more detailed than that?
Yeah, I guess you could say, first things, when I first step into a warehouse, I guess you can really identify is the first signs I'll look at really are day one.
I know we all would love to hear a story where this kind of took place. What was the monster? How did you tame it? Give us a little story. Welcome everyone to Vserve e-business solution podcast on supply chain management, where we invite some of the great industry experts to talk about their experiences and hopefully gather some helpful tips along the way. I'm Cynthia, and today we are joined by an expert who is known as the warehouse whisperer. That's an interesting nickname I just heard about. And with his hands-on, in-person consulting approach, he specializes in optimizing underperforming warehouses by identifying root causes and deploying actionable mechanisms. He's a true specialist in bridging the gaps between chaos and control through process, people, and technology. So please join me in welcoming the founder of JD Zapp Consulting, Jason Zapp. Jason, it's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you very much, Cynthia. It's a pleasure to be here.
Same thing. Thank you so much, Jason. And I am so interested. I've read a few things about you and the warehouse whisperer. So I want to hear all about that. Where did that start from? Where did that come from? And why that?
Mainly, I guess the best way I could say it is that the true connection between myself and a warehouse is that it all stems from organization and structure, right? Mm-hmm. And when there is a disconnect there, in an operation, specifically in a warehouse or a logistical setting where there is a lack of organization or structure, and it's no fault of anybody's own. A lot of times it just happens because of growth, and things happen really quickly and the operation isn't able to sustain itself. It's just the organizational pieces and the structured pieces kind of fall apart really quickly. And so that's where I kind of come in, right? And so I've learned that it's kind of something that it's kind of was instilled in me a long time ago, in the U.S. Army. It's just stuck with me all along the years, right? So I guess that's probably where it came from.
Perfect. So I've recently learned a lot about warehouse from our recent podcast. And we always used to think, right, the younger generation, that warehouse is that ugly part of work that you don't really want to get into. It's the boring aspect of it. So according to you, what kind of drives you towards warehouse? Why is it so interesting?
I guess I've always been involved in this industry, and it wasn't what I've always wanted to do, and it hasn't always been like the sexy type of industry. It's just something that I've always just I started my career early on, when I was 17 years old as a supply clerk, and I've just stayed in this industry and just kind of worked my way up through the rank and learned as much as I possibly could, doing work, back on, paper and pencil, and taking inventory that way and picking orders off of, paper invoices, paper pick sheets and stuff like that. So I've learned a lot, on implementing technology and how you need people, to kind of help you execute, and growing up, learning management phases in warehouse and in operations, and just learning through the school of hard knocks, I guess you could say.
Perfect. So do you actually help warehouses understand their inefficiencies, kind of what is, the key signs that you should look for in terms of seeing, these are the areas of problems? Is that something that you do, or is it more detailed than that?
Yeah, I guess you could say first things, when I first step into a warehouse, I guess you can really identify is the first signs I'll look at really are day one, like when they take a tour through is how organized they are, structured they are. You can really see right off the bat like where their gaps are, and also even try to take a temp check of their staff, right? To have a couple conversations with the staff there, and you can get a temp check based on just having some side conversations with the people that are doing the work there. And you can really gauge where the atmosphere is there, and in that way. But yes.
Nice. So what has been like the most common like root causes that you have found apart from like, obviously the structure aspect of it that, kind of calls out to you like, hey, this is where the issue is. Let's fix this.
Yeah, that's a really good question, because there's usually several root causes behind every action, right? So as you uncover one, there's usually like several little like holes that are going down, the things that need to be fixed, right? So, usually it's poor process adherence, right? And it stems from usually like either not having the right org structure in place or not having the right people in place. And I don't want to say the right people. It's just maybe that we don't have the right personnel in the right positions, right? Just because the growth has happened so fast, and you're just filling positions, trying to get the work done and get the work out the door just to fulfill the customer's needs, and they're not being trained properly. A series of things, but it usually stems from poor process adherence, right? And not being trained properly. That's usually really it, and not having the personnel in the right positions, the key positions there.
Yeah. And, we have been talking a lot about warehouse in our podcast as well. And, there's so many companies, especially like Amazon, that have, crossed, say, 1 million warehouses, right? They're doing like robots and automation and stuff like that. How is, according to you, technology, especially AI, has played a role in getting into the warehouse and kind of optimizing it? Has it been good, is what you're seeing, or has it kind of posed its own issues in terms of training?
It's been really good. It's been able to help, with establish some processes and to eliminate some of the manual work, right? When you're needing to, develop standard operating procedures and whatnot. It's able to cut out some of the back end work, the process, creation, things that can help with that. It can help formulate and build the foundations for some of those things. And you can use like those 10,000 people's experience, the robots experience for all that, and you will allow it to build that for you. And then you just kind of tweak it out for your own personal, piece of business. But yes, it's been very helpful.
Perfect. And how do you like for sustainable, obviously the long-term improvements during your consulting work, what have been like these quick fixes that you have worked through over the years?
Yeah. So like quick
Anything
fixes. Yeah, I mean, like you got to really pick for a quick fix, you got to really pick the big ugly monster, right? Like you got to see what's the biggest problem that you're dealing with, right? And you got to really apply pressure to it right away. And you have to assemble a tangible action plan right towards that, right? And then you build out your milestones or your tangible action plan for the long-term pattern that you want to for your long-term sustainable plan. But for immediate, like an emergency, like you gotta hit the pause button, hit the reset button, look at the big monster that you're staring at whatever your biggest problem is, and then build a plan like right now, right? Grab your leaders, use the minds that are in the room, the people that are doing the work, build the plan. How are you going to fix it? What's the best way to attack it? And then that's usually the best way to do it, right? And every business is different. It's like a human being or a child, like they're all different, and you have to approach it differently, the same type of foundational format, right? Process, give it a process, give it an owner, and audit it afterwards, right? So
I'm pretty sure you must have like so many stories of, helping out the kind of bringing from chaos into control into the warehouse operation, finding that monster. And I know we all would love to hear a story where this kind of took place? Like, what was the monster? How did you tame it? Give us a little story.
We had a food distribution center, and it was customers were getting, they were getting damaged goods. They were getting incorrect product. They were getting, and on the shipments, it wasn't like a full truckloads that were shipping out. There were, straight trucks. They were full trailer loads. They were mixed loads, right? So there were multiple stops on the truck, and it was very difficult for the drivers, when they were making the delivery to identify what stops were what, and they were having a hard time, identifying what steps were what when they were making the delivery. There was damages happening, pallets were tipping over. It was a mess, right? So, we had to really quickly implement. This is like day one. We implemented like an audit system on the stuff before it went into the trucks, before it went loaded. We audited. We put one person on the floor their job was to check to make sure everything was, more or less dress. It was perfect before it went into the truck. And the audit was what were the customer's key components that they needed to make sure that this business needed to make sure that they checked off before it left the building, right? Whether it was, there was all the boxes weren't damaged, whether it was, it was the right lot numbers, whatever they were, these were the boxes that needed to be checked, right? The pallets were shrink wrapped properly. There was no mixed customers on a pallet, whatever that the customers wanted. That's how those were the audit that we built, right? And like you said, every business is different, right? So we built the audit, and we implemented it. That was the big monster of that customer that was glaring them in the face, right? Because their customers were getting angry. That was why they hired me to bring. So long story short, so that was a really big success story. We found success within a week. It was immediate impact, and then we were just able to audit that and then audit our audit process, find ways that we can continue to get it better and build on it, and make sure we had the right people doing it. Usually you find that you reward your best performers, and you give them a job with more responsibility, and and you reward them for that, right? And so it's usually they want to help out.
And it all comes back to like the structure, right? Having the right people in place, making sure everything is organized and structured. So I understand where that comes out from. So, and obviously in your time period, obviously you've probably seen the leadership teams, right? Which one is the best leaders that kind of manage this warehouse and the efficiency that comes with it. According to you, what is like that one trait within a leader that they should have when it comes to this mindset of making your warehouse efficient?
Yeah, is really being open-minded, right? And not looking at every problem as being like the end of the world, right? Is like, like it's like the world's going to end, and throwing things and just storming off. And, that's just a typical sign of, somebody that cannot handle the pressure. Really somebody, you need somebody that can just, their mind can expand. The way that I like to approach it and the way that I like to, engage with the team is just, these are opportunities for the team to get better, right? These are like it's payment for your future self, right? These are learning opportunities. So you can pay yourself down the road, right? Where you're going to make more money down the road as a future leader, as a young man, as a middle-aged in your career. These are opportunities for you to say, like, I've learned this, I've done this, I've been able to solve these problems for this company. And you want to be in a position where you're solving problems for your boss. You're taking the load off of his desk so that he doesn't have to worry about that, right? So so just to reframe the problem, look at it as an opportunity to get better. Look at it as an opportunity to solve a problem instead of like it's the end of the world, right? So it's just looking at it a little bit differently.
Definitely. Yeah. And, with the new leaders kind of coming in, there's been a lot of like, I remember there's a 225 Deloitte survey where we're seeing about 57% of supply chain leaders of today are planning to increase kind of their outsourcing, right? Non-core functions, and especially to improve efficiency, but also the main problem that all these companies face is reducing cost. Right. So according to you, where do you think outsourcing fits within the warehouse? Like, are there opportunities there that do help them, or, helps with the better communication, with efficiencies? What kind of, functions do you think play in that role?
Yeah, I think in outsourcing, just in my experience with outsourcing, some of the things, some of the tools have been with putting some like documents together, dashboards with like Power BI, just were things where I haven't been able to do them. Some other things have been with, like with shipment confirmations, ASN follow-ups, POD collections, invoice clarifications. There's some things where time consuming, and require a little bit of a local presence, but they can do some behind the scenes work, for the on-site personnel. But but like a lot of I've used like off support, for specific like dashboards, and have dashboards built where we've extracted data from WMS and have had that data put into like dashboards for us for presentations and QBRs and whatnot for us to provide for our clients.
Yeah, yep. And exactly. So even Vserve, like we help, I know I've kind of onboarded customers where we do a lot of these structuring and documentation work for them. And we've heard back like, how it has helped them throughout like their time period to have these documents together and kind of make a structured and organized format. And they're able to kind of check these, little red marks off of their sheet. Okay, this is where the issue is. So according to you, when you see these, reports and stuff like that, what are like that top 3 things that immediately catches your attention? You're like, okay, these are the 3 things that are standing out and we need to like start fixing this issue right here. Is there any like metrics in particular?
Well, I think that if you have the metric, each organization should really have their own metrics, like, or if their customers are giving them the metrics that they need to measure. Right. So if it's like a 3PL, or if it's an organization that has the metrics that they want to measure themselves, then that's what they're measuring themselves up against, because the data doesn't lie. Right. So if you're extracting the data out of your WMS, putting it into a BI or a dashboard, right, and you're able to monitor that weekly or monthly, and then you're able to report that back to your team, and you're able to say, hey, listen, this is where we're at. Where are, what are we doing well? How can we get, how can we get better? How can we mirror this? What are we doing wrong? What do we need to action? What kind of action plans do we need to put in place to get better? Right. And then we would build that type of action plan. But yes, that's exactly it. Right.
Yep, definitely. So how do you coach these warehouse teams? Like, how do you know to go into this place and be like, okay, this is what you need to focus on? Is it, obviously it's like case by case, but what is your strategy behind managing teams like that?
Yeah, so I have my own system, and it's and my system's called a TPP Activate system, and it's and it's in the TPP, it stands for technology, personnel, and process, right? Because and they all go together, right? If you think of like an ecosystem, right? It's you need people, and you need process, and you need the technology, right? And so you got to have the right personnel, and this is how I when usually I'm working with senior level leaderships, presidents. If it's a smaller company, it's usually a president or a SVP, EVP, something like that. And you have to have the right personnel. You have to have the right processes, following the right processes, and using your technology, your WMS, the right way. And the WMS, or whatever technology will really glue everything together. It'll glue your personnel, and it'll glue your processes all together, right? But it's a matter of making sure that everything is, your ecosystem is all together, right? And so I call it Activate, because I kind of help them put everything together, and then we action it, right? And then we launch it into place, and then I hand it off to them, and then they manage it from there.
Yeah. Well, that kind of answers my next question, but I do want you to add more to it. Like, if you want to create an ideal warehouse where nothing's there, it's like scratch, you have to do everything from bottom all the way to, what are some of the the key features, processes, like cultural elements that you would want to include as a new warehouse?
Yeah, I think if I would want to start, I would look at I'd want to create each vertical, right? I'd want to create each vertical, the technology, the personnel, the process. I'd want each vertical to have an owner, like a department head. I would want to develop metrics in each one of those on how each one is performing, and we would want to have those department heads manage that and report that back into their senior level person, right? How that's managing, right? How that's operating. I would also develop the metrics. I would also develop detailed SOPs for each function in each vertical, right? So your technology, your personnel, and the personnel is your training, and your processes. The personnel is even like your onboarding, as detailed as your onboarding, and how detailed you get with onboarding, and who's responsible for training the new person, who's responsible for training a new manager, right? And these are the how granular you got to get with these, and this is how good, really efficient operations and businesses run, warehouses run, is they're really super granular with these things. And I would audit it, right? And so once we would have this in place, we would audit everything, right? We would have an auditing department, and they would be responsible for auditing everything. We would develop an auditing process, and we would audit everything just to make sure that we're doing everything the right way, right? And we would flush out all the bad processes, and we would have these discussions on what we're doing wrong, why the bad habits are happening, how we're going to correct it, and then we would also give manager ownership, right, inside the verticals, right? Who's owning what? In each department. So, but that's how I would build it, right from scratch.
Yeah. So audit each step. You have to like make sure you're auditing each step. So I understand. So it's more about understanding the reports, what's going on, how to fix it, stuff like that. But you also mentioned that customer, kind of build the expectations of what they're looking for. In today's customer, being myself, I know I look for speed and how accurate they are with their orders, right? So sometimes we ordered something and we get something completely different. Maybe it's a color, maybe it's a different product, but the growing demands of the customers get a little bit more customized. How do you see the next 5 years in the warehouse kind of playing out to kind of evolve and meet those customer customized demands that you've seen?
Yeah, I think the best way to stay ahead of the ball, right, is to try to stay ahead of things. The way I want to, you're going to keep hearing me say it, is to audit, right? You got to, if you're going to, you want to get good at it. You got to be good at it first. And then you got to, because you got to get good at it first before you can get quick, right? So you have, because if you're fast and you're not good, your customer is going to throw you out the door, right? Or they're going to have penalties in your contract, or whatever the case is, right? And you're not going to want to pay penalties to your customer, right? Or at least your commercial team isn't, your finance team isn't going to want you to have to pay penalties, to your customer, because your operations can't keep up, right? So you're going to want to audit. You're going to want to make sure you have the right personnel in the right positions, right? And you're going to want to audit. You're going to want to train and retrain. Have monthly trainings, right? And just retrain and retrain and retrain, so everybody knows their jobs, in and out. And then just develop, internal and weekly and quarterly metrics, that you want to measure yourself by, right? And then what are your metrics? What are your internal metrics? And then measure yourself, like we talked about, earlier, right? And just have those, pull the data out of the WMS, and then, put it into a BI, and let's sit down and talk about it, right? With your senior management, right? Senior leaders that are on the floor. How are we going to measure ourselves? How are we going to get better? What steps do we need to put in place on the floor to get ourselves in a better position so that we can get faster, so we can do more, right?
That makes absolute sense. And I understand where the warehouse whisperer came into place. It's like somebody whispering in your ears, like, do the audit. Like, I just feel that coming out of this. But I mean, it's been a great conversation, Jason. And I always leave with this one question for the future, business owners, supply chain leaders, and future warehouse whisperers. What is that one piece of advice that you'd give to kind of ensure, the warehouse becomes a true competitive advantage for companies and people pay a bit more attention towards that area?
Yeah, I guess I guess the real key component is your people, right? I guess that's the main thing, is your people are your prosperity, right? Is
Yep.
that everything is in your people, right? It's all in your people. I guess that's if I can leave with anything, it's
People.
everything's in your people.
Yep. No matter how advanced we become with AI, people is the most important part of the company. So perfect, Jason. This has been an incredibly insightful and very practical conversation. I hope like we all learned something today. Audit your warehouses. That's the only thing you need to do to make it efficient. And reach out to Jason to get more advice. But thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us. And it was great having you here today.
Thank you, Cynthia. Have a good one. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.